Hi, good morning and welcome to ECIST Bitesize podcasts. My name's Helen Bennett. I'm a Senior Improvement Manager with the Emergency Care Improvement Support Team. And this morning I'm delighted to be talking to Dr. Rob Galloway. Rob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Rob. I'm an A&E consultant down in Brighton, and I've been a consultant there for 10 years. And for some unknown reason, I've developed an interest in staffing of departments. And so thank you very much for asking me to come and speak to you today.
Lovely. Thank you, Rob, and thank you for your time with us. So as you just said, so this bite size, we're going to be talking about your staffing rotas and what you've been doing over in Brighton and what you've been developing. So let's just get started, Rob. So let's go straight into what led this for you? What was the desire that drove you to make the changes?
So I've been working in A&E for 19 years, and it's a brilliant job. Love it. But in all honesty, the rota put me off wanting to stay in A&E. You missed your friends' birthdays, weddings. It just got really bad. And I remember as an SHO, things were dreadful in the rota, but I promised my kids that as a consultant it would get much better. But I'd have to go through a registrar to get even be a bit better when I was registrar. As a registrar, it got no better at all. It's still dreadful. But I promised the kids and everything, as a consultant, life would be brilliant. And life was dreadful as a consultant. I still didn't know when I was working, still couldn't plan anything. I remember missing my first kids' nativity play. It's a bit weird. It was like there was a camel in Jerusalem in the snow. It didn't really make any sense, but I wanted to be there and I missed it. And it's just like, oh God, this is really rubbish. And I had a thought that we need to change it. We need to change it for SHOs and registrars, but also in terms of longevity for consultants as well, because when you looked at them, they looked a tired bunch who were burning out. We really were having massive problems to recruit. I was working in Brighton. I was consultant number 8. We were opening a major trauma centre. And we also had Haywards Heath Hospital, which we were a joint trust. And now we're a massive, much bigger trust at University Hospital Sussex. But at the time, we were just Brighton and Haywards Heath. And we had to staff 2 departments, and we had to staff one of them 24/7. And we had 8 consultants, and this was going to be impossible. And so what really struck me was I was also very interested in education. And I just got a 2PA job at the medical school. And speaking to the consultant lead then, and it's like, well, we can't do it. It's not really possible. This is your rota. You'll just have to do it in your own free time. I was like, well, can I not cut down my clinical time? Because, and it just seemed impossible. And I just thought there's got to be a better way of doing this. There's got to be a better way of doing this. And the key to, you can put any investment you want in buildings, any investment you want in equipment or drugs or whatever. The one thing this pandemic has shown us, the key thing for the NHS is our staff. If you don't get staffing right, you can't look after your patients. And if you look after your staff will look after your patients. It is that simple, really. Staff are absolutely crucial. And so I thought, my background before medicine, I was very, very interested in mathematics and statistics. And if I hadn't done medicine as a degree, I would have done statistics. I've got very few friends, and I look at text, I look at maths formulas. It excites me. And so come up with a thought of how about we completely have a different way of looking at it. Forget about whatever NHS employers have said. Forget about whatever the BMA have said. Let's look about what's important from look at the patient's perspective. What a patient wants is a doctor there when they're needed to be. Let's not worry about the traditional annual leave and study leave and all that. Let's just think about we need doctors when patients are there. So the old days where you had 3 A&E consultants around in February and none in January because they're all off on Christmas holidays at the beginning of January, but there's loads around in February and March, was madness. Or loads of people in June, but no one around in August is absolutely unacceptable and madness. So I had an idea that we could get rid of the concept of annual leave and study leave and bank holidays and everything like that, and just work out the number of PAs you had to do over a year or over a fixed period of time. And so we basically said, here's our number of consultants, here's the number of clinical PAs we need to do. We took out all the annual leave and study leave and bank holidays and worked out that this is the number of, over a period of time, how many hours for juniors or periods of activity for consultants you had to do. Then we worked out what could we actually cover. And anything we couldn't cover had to be done at locum, or we could recruit more. But what this did is it suddenly made people who are part-time incredibly attractive to us. and incredibly, instead of saying, oh, and it sounds awful, but when I wanted to go part-time clinical, it was like, oh, you're a pain. When I had a colleague who wanted to go part-time for family reasons, oh, you're a pain, and absolutely not the case now, but that was the general attitude 10, 12 years ago. And that wasn't because of sexism, I think. It was purely because of an inability to think outside the box with rostering. So we had this new idea that you had to do a certain number of PAs or hours if you're juniors over a period of time, and as long as everything was covered, it didn't matter when you worked, and your leave was when you weren't working or you weren't down for non-clinical work. So a really good concept is, I've got a friend of mine called Emma Brown. She's an A&E consultant who's she's on 4 PAs, so 2 days a week in a traditional sense. But what she actually is she's the British Antarctic Expedition Doctor. So for months and months a year, she's counting what penguins do in their spare time. I don't know what she does, but she does research with penguins in the British Antarctic Expedition. But she comes back to the UK in the summer holidays, Christmas and Easter. So instead of doing 4 PAs 2 days a week, she does 12 PAs or 5 to 6 days a week during intensive periods of time. And as long as she finishes her contract with us, owing no time, then it works brilliantly for her and it works brilliantly for us. So the concepts of, oh, you've got to do 2 days a week and you've got to you can't carry out over annual leave, we just completely and utterly ignored that. And so I came up with this idea and said, right, this is our idea. Everyone's got to do this number of PAs. And my consultant colleagues looked at me and said, it will never work. How can we get everybody to sit in a room and work it out? Lucy said, well, if we were in a room and we just made sure we didn't leave the room until every single shift was covered, as long as we've got enough shifts to do, then got enough hours to do and we cover every shift, then we managed to work it out amongst ourselves. And again, some said it wouldn't work. And I basically said, well, it's not my idea. It's come from Sussex Police, the chief inspectors who do nights as well. And when I said that, people started to show an interest and think it possibly could be done. The problem was it wasn't true. I hadn't got it from Sussex Police. I just made up the idea. But don't when you're desperate. And I was pretty desperate that I was going to leave my job. I loved my job. I just couldn't cope with the way it was working. And I wanted to do the medical school job, so I had to come up with a radical plan. So we did it. And so for example, me, I was during my time at the medical school, I needed to do very little clinical because I was doing all the examining and the sub-dean work. And so there's times in April when I really did no clinical, but when there wasn't students around, I did much more than my 6 clinical PAs. So I do like 10, 12 PAs. But over a period of 20 weeks, we did it in a 20-week cycle. We self-rostered and got all the shifts covered. Okay, and we're much more efficient than ever before, because instead of having 1 week there'll be 3 people on a day and the next week there'll be 1 person on a day because there are people on annual leave, we always got an even 2 people a day. And so we started to see a difference. But also the key thing was every shift you did came off your total. And so if someone needs to do a last minute swap, you would just take that shift off them. So I remember about 3 years ago, my son, I didn't want to be a doctor. I wanted to be a footballer. I was rubbish, so I had to be a doctor instead. But I lived vicariously through my son. He's quite a good footballer, and he had a trial for Brighton Football Club. I got, we only had 1 day's notice. I put out a WhatsApp, can anybody do my shift? Instead of doing a swap, someone just did my shift for me. They took the hours off me and went into their total, and then they did the shift. And so it created a lot of cooperation and goodwill, and people started to want to work for us. Sorry.
So Rob, that sounds like what you've developed is a culture of flexibility and an organisation where your colleagues and yourselves are really valued and value each other's time and work-life balance. So yeah. How does that go down into your sort of junior workforce? How does that look for the juniors that work with you in your department?
We use a very, very similar way, but obviously it's harder when there's larger numbers. But just carrying on what this did, what this allowed us was to start doing nights because you got differential rates for night shifts. And we were the first department, one of the first departments in the country to have consultants work on the shop floor at night. But the other key thing was recruitment. I was consultant number 8. We've now got 28 consultants 8 years later. And of the last, I think, 15 appointments, 13 have been female. Now, that's quite unusual in A&E. I know it's much more common now for female consultants, but we've really recruited people who want to work because of the flexibility. So people do it around caring responsibilities, but also whether they've got kids or not. But people who want to have do work for 3 weeks and then go off for a couple of weeks, before when travelling was allowed. And so this system has allowed us to really recruit. It's allowed us to have even spread of staff. It's allowed us to have 24-hour working, and it's really revolutionised what we did. We did it all on Excel originally, and it just was impossible to run on Excel when you got to larger numbers. And so I looked at a lot of other rota systems and a lot of rota companies to see if they could adopt what we've done, and no one could. And so I worked with some computer developers called Health Rota, not Health Roster, but Health Rota, ROTA, and to develop rota systems which you could use this annualization, and it worked to treat. And now they're used in numerous A&E departments and outside of A&E departments, and it's really changed the way we think of work. So we don't roster our study. You automatically get given all your annual leave, all your study leave, all your bank holidays, and the non-clinical time at the moment isn't rostered, and you just do it when you're off. It creates such goodwill. It's saved out, allowed us to do 24/7, and allowed us to cover another hospital which would have closed at A&E department. And the big thing when I knew it was going to work was we had a Christmas party about 4 years ago, and 3 spouses came up to me and said, because of the rota, their marriage has been saved. Now, admittedly, only 2 of them were happy about that, but the fact is it made a massive difference. So your question is, how do we develop it for the juniors? So for the registrars, it's quite easy. You can get them in a room. Now, obviously, it's harder with Corona, and we now do a virtual thing. We send in our requests by email, and my colleague now runs the consultant one. Another colleague now runs the registrar ones. But it's quite easy to do for registrars because you've got, you can still self-roster with those type of numbers. For SHOs, we had to have a different way of thinking. And the first thing we had massive numbers, massive locum bills. Before I started taking the rota, we were having locums of about £1 million a year in A&E in our trust, which is ridiculous. And, there are some good locums, absolutely, but the money's much better to be invested in permanent staff. But you could not recruit non-training doctors. We had 9 F2s for a major trauma centre and a second hospital, which is just, you're not going to run a rota for that. You had 9 F2s, 6 GP VTSs, and 3 ACCS doctors. There is absolutely no way with 15 doctors you can run 2 hospitals at SHO wise. So we had to have a radical different approach. So what we did, we set up our clinical fellow program using a lot of the annualization system that we had, but also with non-clinical time. So our clinical fellows, we employed them for 48 hours a week. And the first thing we did was we said, you should be paid for your work you do, which isn't clinical. So quality improvement projects, audits, etc. So 3 hours a week was paid, but not rostered. This was revolutionary 5 years ago when we brought it in. It's now the HE brought it in 5 years after us for F2s, but not for everyone yet. But we brought it in for everybody, and we brought it in for all our juniors, so F1s, F2s, GPVTSs, everybody. So 3 hours a week was non-rostered, and that took a lot of, it's very good of our trust to agree with that, because you could say we're wasting 6.25% of our salary, but actually it's not, because instead of them doing exception reports, they're getting, they're getting paid to do this time. So it reduces the exception reports, it creates goodwill, improves recruitment and retention and longevity. The next thing we said is we want everybody to automatically get all their entitlement for annual leave and study leave without having to apply. So for example, and this is again is revolutionary, our GPVCS automatically gave them 6 weeks of study leave. The way we did that is we took those weeks off your hours. Okay, and so again, get rid of the concept of annual leave, get rid of the concept of study leave. These are the number of hours clinical you have to do. So you did 45 hours a week, and we took off all your study leave, all your annual leave, they automatically got it, and all the bank holidays, because you should get bank holidays if you're on a full shift system, whether you work it or it's a rest day, you should get it off. And so we took them off. So if, for example, you had a GP VTS who had 6 weeks of study leave, 6 weeks of annual leave, and 2 weeks of bank holidays roughly, that would be 38 weeks. They'd only work 38 weeks a year. So with times 38 times 45, okay, there's a number of hours they'd need to do a year. And if they're doing for 4 months, they would do a third of that. We started that, and that was great for our trainees, because we could then say to them, before we make the rota, tell us what shifts you want to work. And tell us what shifts you don't want to work. And so we'd pre-plan it. So they'd get an app, and it was all done on Excel beforehand, and they just mark off the days they couldn't work, separate their annual leave and study leave. But if they had like friends, normally you can't choose annual leave on weekends, and absolutely it's not weekends, but we'd get them to mark off their annual leave, but also unavailability on other days, so we could pre-plan a rota around them. So instead of the computer set, I remember friends who were getting married and trying to get 2 weeks off for their wedding, and they'd say, come back to us in April. It's like, well, our wedding's in August. Well, we can't look at the rota before April. The computer would say no in medical staffing. It is so difficult to organise rotas unless someone's passionate about them and you have different ways of doing it. So we managed to really change things absolutely for the better for our standard staff, but we're still struggling to recruit, because doing a non-clinical job in A&E 45 hours a week, clinical fellows only get 2 weeks study leave, is very, very hard to recruit. So we brought in this concept of non-clinical time, and here they'll get 25% of their time not being clinical but doing projects. So education fellows, simulation fellows, quality improvement projects. So these then became incredibly popular, and it utterly revolutionised the department. We've got 25 SHOs doing this. We've got about 12 middle grades. Till Corona, we were locum free at both SHO and registrar level for about 3 years. It's all on an app. It is possible if you use spreadsheets, and I say during the first couple of years we used Excel, and we did really well in it. We excelled ourselves. That's a really rubbish statement, but we did really well using Excel. But then we developed the IT, and the only our trust, in all honesty, bought Allocate, but you just couldn't use it on Allocate because they don't do annualization, they don't do the systems that you need, and so I had to develop my own. Well, I didn't develop. I'm not clever enough, but I got in contact with developers who develop roster systems who have rolling it out to other organisations in a very, very cheap way, and made it possible. So we did it for juniors in A&E, and then we've spread it to medicine, and that's the biggest challenge. And I can talk about that if that's useful, about how we have medical wards.
I think, you've covered ever such a lot, Rob, and I think it's probably good for another one to talk through the medicine and what that looks like for rostering for medicine. Just lastly, for the audience that are listening to this, Rob's very kindly happy to have all his details so that if anybody wants to get in contact with you, then they can do that. And that's, I think that is, you're likely to get a lot of people, if you haven't already, with the work that you've been doing, because it sounds like you've created such a great environment that people are I'm sure you've got queues of people waiting to come and get a job with you all down in Brighton. But so thank you very much, Rob, for talking to us this morning on ECIST Bitesize, and I look forward to talking to you again at some point about the medicine rotas.
Cool. Just so people know the courses, there's the Royal College of Emergency Medicine guides to self-rostering, which we've got a link to. There's also be a link to a BMA video on Mind the Rota Gap, which they made, looking at how our rotas have improved the welfare for junior doctors. And so there'll be the 2 links, plus there'll be my email if people want to contact me.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for your time.